Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Larceny at the Library by Colleen Shogan. Narrated by Angie Hickman. Chapter 1. Kit, please be careful. You almost knocked the Lincoln Bible off the table. Those weren't words you heard every day from your husband. Reflexively, I backed away from the ornate wooden table inside the Librarian of Congress's ceremonial office. Sorry, I murmured. I'll try to be more careful. Doug was referring to the actual Bible owned by the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. With a dark red velvet cover, the small book itself wasn't particularly valuable. Nonetheless, its provenance made it a national treasure. Lincoln was sworn into office in 1861 with it, as was Barack Obama and Donald Trump. I knew this historical fun fact and dozens more because I was married to the head of the scholarly center at the Library of Congress, who was also a Georgetown American history professor. Right now, he was bustling around the librarian's ornate office, preparing for a VIP pre-show displaying several of the library's top treasures. He stopped and walked over next to me, giving my hand an affectionate squeeze. "The food and drink should be set up right outside the office," said Doug. "Why don't you wait there for our guests?" As a chief of staff for a member of Congress, I knew how to take a subtle hint. Before I instigated the destruction of a cherished item with national significance, perhaps a walk outside was in order. Besides, I was thirsty and hungry. Doug had promised a high-end bar and tasty treats. History could wait until I'd had a glass of wine and 3 or 4 fancy canapés. Before I could grab a Chardonnay from the waiter, my phone buzzed. My best friend and Congressional staff colleague, Meg, had texted me. "Trevor and I are headed over now." I typed back a response. "It's Trevor's date night?" 3 dots appeared, indicating Meg was writing a response. "He wouldn't miss this." I chuckled. Meg had started dating our former Senate colleague Trevor just over 6 months ago. Their relationship could be described as classic love-hate. For years they bickered, each claiming he or she detested the other. Then Trevor professed his romantic infatuation with Meg last summer, and she agreed to go out with him. Much to Trevor's chagrin, it wasn't an exclusive relationship on Meg's part. She was dating one other guy, a current House Chief of Staff. Such insular amorous intrigue could get exhausting, but long ago I'd learned not to tell Meg what to do in the dating department. "Hey, big sister." I looked up from my phone when I heard my brother's voice. Sebastian had recently moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and now worked as a tech guru at a local nonprofit. Tall and trim, Sebastian had arrived in his hipster millennial work attire, consisting of tartan plaid pants, a gray cardigan, deep red tie, and white button-down shirt. At least he'd listened to my advice that an invitation to a swanky, intimate reception at the Library of Congress meant he couldn't wear a stylish sweater, skinny jeans, and slip-on loafers. "Looking sharp, little brother." I reached up and gave him a hug. After years of living apart, we'd recently become reacquainted with each other. We had more in common than we initially thought, although our physical appearances didn't peg us for siblings. Sebastian had a lean build, with sandy locks that made him seem as though he belonged on a surfing beach in California. With long, brown, straight hair, I was average height and build, although I routinely thought my obituary might one day read, "Kit Marshall, Congressional staffer and amateur sleuth extraordinaire, who courageously tried to lose 10 pounds. We walked over to the bar and each ordered a glass of wine. After taking a sip, we placed our glasses on a high-top table covered with a fancy white cloth. Sebastian's eyes wandered. "Fancy Dick's here. I've never been inside the Library of Congress." As if on command, a middle-aged man dressed in a traditional dark suit appeared next to us. "Sorry to interrupt, but I overheard this was your first time visiting us." Sebastian nodded. "My brother-in-law is helping with the reception tonight. My name is Sebastian, and this is my sister, Kit Marshall." Our eager guest smiled widely. "You must be married to Doug Hollingsworth. I'm Joe Malden, the general counsel for this great institution." He tipped his tumbler of amber liquid in our direction. "Doug has mentioned you," I said. The Red Sox fan, right? Joe Malden's smile grew. Absolutely. And I'm stuck here in Washington, the land of the Nationals. Doesn't stop me from cheering for my Sox. What's the deal for tonight? Asked Sebastian. Doug and Kit invited me, but I'm not sure what I've gotten myself into. Malden leaned forward with a glint in his eyes. First of all, you're standing inside the Great Hall of the Thomas Jefferson Building. It opened in 1897, and it's arguably the most beautiful room in Washington. Malden wasn't exaggerating. The surrounding open space was ornately decorated, in a style reminiscent of the Italian Renaissance, although uniquely American at the same time. We were standing on the bottom floor of the two-story building, surrounded by colorful murals, statues, mosaics, and a vaulted marble ceiling. If I didn't know where I was, I might have thought I was enjoying a glass of wine in a far-flung European Capitol Art Museum. Sebastian swiveled his neck around. Can't disagree with you, although I haven't seen as much of the sights as I'd like since moving here. This is our country's pantheon of knowledge. Authors, inventors, scientists, and world cultures are represented, said Joe. Every sculpture, engraving, and entryway has significance. At the turn of the century, it was built to show the United States was equal to Europe in matters of knowledge and culture. It must have cost a fortune to build, I muttered. The member of Congress I worked for, Maeve Dixon from North Carolina, had recently been appointed as the chair of the committee which provided oversight to Capitol Hill itself, including the Library of Congress. We were constantly fretting over authorized expenditures, cognizant that the American people didn't want Congress spending lavishly in its own backyard as the federal deficit ballooned. Not exactly, said Joe. Only $6.3 million, and it was under budget. Sebastian took a sip of wine. That's a bargain. You can't even build a reputable data server for that amount these days. You'll have to excuse my brother. He's a techie who thinks the world revolves around the internet, I said. Joe Malden laughed. We know a thing or two about servers these days. It's not just about collecting old dusty books anymore. We're putting our digital collections online for everyone to explore. Speaking of old stuff, can you tell us more about what we're going to see this evening? I asked. When Doug had the opportunity to invite guests to this evening's preview, he hadn't given too many specifics, other than it was a rehearsal for tomorrow's big event celebrating Lincoln's birthday. I'm not the expert curator, but as I understand it, we will be viewing one of the library's most treasured collections, said Malden. He had just taken a breath to continue when a high-pitched feminine voice interrupted. One of the crown jewels, she said. A well-put-together middle-aged woman with professionally styled shoulder-length blonde hair joined us at our standing table. She wore a long-sleeve, expensive-looking print dress perfectly fitted to her well-proportioned frame. I guessed Dolce & Gabbana, but I was no fashion blogger. Her makeup was expertly applied, and I noticed she wore diamond earrings with a matching necklace that tripled the carat count. I'd eat my hat if this woman worked at the Library of Congress. If she did, I needed to consider a career change. Pronto. We scooted over to make room for our new guest. She placed her tumbler aside and offered her hand. Leah Rutherford. I accepted it, noticing that diamonds also adorned her slim fingers, along with other brightly colored gems. I introduced myself, and Sebastian followed in turn. What is your relationship to the Library of Congress? Asked Sebastian innocently. Joe answered before Leah could speak. Ms. Rutherford is one of our most generous donors, a true patron of the humanities in Washington. Big shocker. I'm happy to support worthy institutions. She glanced sideways at Malden. You wouldn't think it, but sometimes my assistance isn't welcome. Really? Funding is scarce on Capitol Hill these days. I'm surprised they're not beating down the door for help, I said. Joe raised his eyebrows and wiggled them in my direction. I took it as a clumsy sign to drop the issue, so I quickly changed the topic. Back to Sebastian's question. What will be on display tonight? Joe took advantage of the opportunity to steer the conversation back to safer ground. The contents of Lincoln's pockets. Sebastian interrupted. The library owns Lincoln's personal possessions? Joe smirked. You didn't let me finish. The contents of Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated. Sebastian and I gasped at the same time. Both Joe and Leia laughed at our reaction. I don't mean to be a bore, but I'm going to repeat my brother's question. Why does the Library of Congress have these items in its collection? Joe motioned toward an older, slightly built gentleman walking inside the ceremonial office. I'm sure you'll hear the story from him tonight. Who's that? Asked Sebastian, draining his drink. Gustav Gaffney, said Leia. He's the Assistant Librarian of Congress, the number 2 around here. And our host for this evening, said Joe. He's been a librarian for decades and makes it his business to know our collections inside out. You can say that again, muttered Leia. Joe patted Leia's hand. You have to forgive Miss Rutherford. She and the assistant librarian occasionally disagree concerning where to focus resources at the Library of Congress. Leia smiled tightly. No need to apologize, Joe. You know I've made alternate plans for my dollars. As Kit mentioned, there's plenty of places who welcome my financial support these days. I hadn't met Gustav Gaffney before, but his name was familiar. As I recall, he hadn't enthusiastically supported Doug's selection as head of the Scholarly Center, believing that Doug would only serve in the position for a short period of time before returning to his tenure professorship at Georgetown. However, Gaffney's boss, the Librarian of Congress, had overruled him and made the appointment. As the chief of staff for an important member of Congress, I'd steered clear of the matter entirely. I knew a conflict of interest when I saw one. Doug emerged from the ceremonial office and approached our gathering. We'll begin our short program in about 10 minutes. We're waiting for a member of Congress to arrive. Once he shows up, we can start. I turned to Joe. I thought the Congressional event was tomorrow. That's when my boss plans to attend. You know, Maeve Dixon. Joe's eyebrows furrowed. Of course, we know Chairwoman Dixon. He glanced around nervously, then spotted a tall woman in her early 50s, with short, light brown hair and a substantial build. Waving at her, he said, Janice, can you come over here for a moment? She hustled over and, ignoring everyone else, spoke directly to Joe. I'm looking out for our Congressional guest. What's wrong? Joe motioned in my direction. Janice, you must know Kit Marshall. I stuck out my hand and she politely accepted it. I've heard the name. Joe cleared his throat. She's a chief of staff in the House. He paused for a beat. Maeve Dixon's chief. Janice's entire visage changed in an instant. Her face lit up, a wide smile spreading across her face. Certainly, we work with Chairwoman Dixon's committee staff and Meg Peters from your office. I'm Janice Jackson, the head of Congressional Relations for the library. Meg is our legislative director, and she's assigned to liaise with the committee from our personal office, I explained. But I have another connection to the Library of Congress. My husband is Doug Hollingsworth, the newly appointed director of the Scholarly Center. Janice hit her forehead. Yes, of course. Doug told me about you when we chatted after his appointment. So glad to welcome you to the Library of Congress this evening. You certainly do have a lot of connections here. While her voice and expression seemed genuine on the surface, I felt like the warmth was forced. I introduced Sebastian and explained that Meg and her guest would be arriving soon. I heard that we're waiting for a member of Congress to arrive. I didn't think members were invited tonight. I didn't want to appear difficult, but if my boss found out she missed an exclusive viewing, she'd be annoyed. After all, she was the chair of the Oversight Committee with Library of Congress jurisdiction. It might seem petty, but Maeve Dixon suffered from extreme FOMO, otherwise known as fear of missing out. Members of Congress weren't invited tonight. Tomorrow is the big day, and Maeve Dixon is going to kick it off for us by introducing the Librarian of Congress. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder. Don't worry, Kit. We'd never shortchange Chairwoman Dixon. We have one member of Congress who can't make it tomorrow morning, and he was quite eager to view the special display we have on tap. As a courtesy, we allowed him to attend the rehearsal this evening. I pursed my lips. Representative Henry Chang? Janice laughed. How did you know? Yes, Congressman Chang is quite the aficionado of history. I believe he has his own modest collection of historical items. He's over here at the Library of Congress on a regular basis. Given his intense interest in our collections, particularly related to Lincoln and other presidents, we decided to offer him the opportunity to attend the preview. My face relaxed. No problem, I said. Thank you for explaining that to me. I heard a female voice over my right shoulder. Explain what? It was Meg, who had arrived with Trevor in tow. The fashion mogul of Capitol Hill, Meg was decked out in a pretty black long-sleeved shirt dress, accented with a multicolored scarf around her trim waist. Her sleek blonde bob shone underneath the soft lighting of the Jefferson Building. Janice reached over and gave Meg a half hug. Thank you for attending, Meg. Who is your guest this evening? Meg stepped aside to allow Trevor to join our growing circle. He was dressed in his typical attire, a dark blue suit, neutral red tie, a crisp white-collared shirt, and horn-rimmed glasses. Trevor wasn't going to win Hunk of the Year. Nevertheless, he had a certain smart DC smart guy sex appeal that made him reasonably attractive, particularly to a Capitol Hill audience. Before this past year, I would have never thought Meg would have given someone like Trevor the time of day. She usually went for the guy who could have become a Chippendale dancer if he'd chosen a divergent career path. But Trevor's obvious devotion and maturity had resonated with Meg at the right time. Timing was everything in life. Meg linked her arm underneath Trevor's. After he introduced himself, Meg added, Trevor is a senior advisor to the CAO in the House. That was Washington, D.C. lingo for the Chief Administrative Officer, who managed all the operations, technology, and facilities within the House of Representatives. Trevor had enjoyed a storied career in Washington, which began in the Senate as our co-worker. Then he'd become a defense lobbyist and a tell-all best-selling author. He'd finally settled into the relatively tame position with the Chief Administrative Officer, where he appeared to excel. Trevor was the master of details, and the CAO relied upon him to keep everything straight. Trevor patted Meg's arm with his other hand. Nothing quite as impressive as the work that's done here, he said, his eyes drifting toward the ceiling of the Great Hall. This structure is simply awe-inspiring. As if on cue, Joe Malden piped up. When the ceiling was restored a few decades ago, they discovered it was inlaid with aluminum plating, not silver. During the period of construction in the 1890s, aluminum was much more valuable than silver. The 6 skylights were designed to match the patterns on the floor below. He took a breath. No expense or detail was spared. When the doors to the Thomas Jefferson Building opened, it signaled our nation's arrival on the global stage of knowledge. The United States would no longer be dwarfed by the likes of London, Paris, or Rome. Janice Jackson chuckled. Joe, if you ever get bored with legal matters, I could hire you as a tour guide for our Congressional VIPs. Leah Rutherford smiled slyly. He's certainly a man of many talents. Joe promptly turned a shade of dark red. I'd better check to see if Gustav needs help with setting up for tonight's viewing. And I think I just saw Representative Chang arrive, said Janice. Please excuse me. She scurried across the Great Hall to intercept the congressman. Meg whispered. Does she mean Henry Chang? The library gave him special permission to attend tonight because he can't go tomorrow, I murmured. Meg wrinkled her nose. He's a pest on the committee. May finds him annoying. He's only a freshman, yet he's always clamoring for tickets to events at glamorous places. It's Chang's first term in Congress, so he's eager, I said. And according to the Congressional Relations person, he likes American history. Janice Jackson, said Meg. She bends over backwards for Chang because she thinks he'll help the Library of Congress on the committee. Isn't that the name of the game, Meg? You know how it works, I said. No surprise that she'd want to make him happy. Isn't that the job of Congressional Relations in a federal agency? Meg fiddled with her silver hoop earring. I'm giving you the background so you understand what's going on, Kit. I smiled. Doug gives me an earful about library politics, but it's helpful to hear it from a veteran like you. Meg beamed. We'd been best friends for a while, but I was also technically Meg's boss. It didn't hurt to provide well-deserved praise every once in a while. A trim, muscular African-American man in his early 40s emerged from the ceremonial office. In a demonstrative voice, he announced, "Please join us inside for a preview of our program. Unfortunately, you will need to leave your refreshments outside." We dutifully left our drinks on the table and made our way toward the entrance to the office. Leah Rutherford appeared next to me. "Leah, who is the gentleman who just spoke?" "Gordon Endicott," she said, "the head of the Rare Books and Special Collections Division." "It seems like he's in charge of the situation." Leah nodded. "You've got that right. He'll be a force to be reckoned with in the future. I have a feeling he doesn't take no for an answer," she said. "Gustav might have his hands full with him." I leaned closer to Leah so I could lower my voice. "I get the sense that Assistant Librarian Gaffney throws his weight around quite a bit." "There's no weight to throw around." She chuckled at her reference to Gaffney's slight build. "But yes, you're right. He has a lot of opinions about everything, and he's not afraid to make them known." "I suppose his job is a tough one," I said. "No doubt," said Leah. "In my experience, most people think they can catch more flies with honey. That lesson is lost on Gustav Gaffney." We'd reached the entrance to the ceremonial office, situated adjacent to the Great Hall. Library of Congress staff members, including Doug, Gaffney, and Endicott, were standing behind the librarian's ornate wooden desk. Gordon Endicott spoke. "Please gather around so we can begin." The crowd was small enough that everyone had a front row spot. Gustav cleared his throat. "Thank you for joining us today. Most of you already know who I am." He peered around the room, reminding me of my middle school English teacher who tried to stare down students who didn't complete the homework assignment. "However, I do not recognize all the faces before me, so I shall introduce myself formally. My name is Gustav Gaffney, and I am the Assistant Librarian of Congress." My phone vibrated. Thank goodness I'd kept it on silent. If I'd interrupted Gustav, I might not live to tell about it. I pulled it out of my suit jacket pocket and glanced at the text message. Of course, it was from Meg. "Is this guy for reals?" I couldn't risk typing back a long reply, but I did manage to send Meg the emoticon equivalent of a wink. Semicolon, close parentheses. Afraid Gaffney might rap my wrist with a ruler for misbehavior, I returned my attention to behind the desk and studied the assistant librarian. Slender, with a long, dour face, the remaining wisps of gray hair on his head indicated he'd never see 65 again. Dressed impeccably in a three-piece vested charcoal suit, I got the impression Gustav Gaffney was a serious man who got the job done, but probably wasn't collecting too many happy hour invitations. This wasn't a man who cared about winning popularity contests. Gaffney kept talking. "This evening, we will preview the display we will provide tomorrow to members of Congress and select guests of the scholarly and library community. Of course, we do have one member of Congress with us this evening." He paused and motioned with his hand to an Asian man standing next to Janice Jackson. "As I understand it, Representative Chang is a collector of American history artifacts and an Abraham Lincoln aficionado." Chang nodded, but didn't say anything. That was uncharacteristic of a politician. Usually they took any opportunity to offer remarks. Maybe Chang hadn't gotten used to his job as a congressman yet. On the surface, he seemed like a fish out of water. From what I could recall, he hadn't been a politician before coming to Congress, and seemed way more interested in what happened a century ago than what was going on inside the Capitol today. Other history buffs had occupied key positions in Congress, such as former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich. Love him or hate him, Newt's head was focused on present-day politics, not the past. Now, we will turn to the newly appointed director of our scholarly center, historian Douglas Hollingsworth. Gaffney motioned for Doug to assume the floor. Thank you, Gustav. First, I'd like to tell you a little about this room, which served as the official office of the librarian until 1980. There have been many kings, queens, presidents, prime ministers, and heads of state who have visited earlier librarians inside this room. Doug took a breath before continuing. As you may know, Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809. Tomorrow, we will celebrate the anniversary of Lincoln's birth by reenacting one of the greatest discoveries ever made within the walls of the Library of Congress. Doug paused and looked around the room. He had everyone's attention. On February 12, 1976, inside this office, the Librarian of Congress at the time, Daniel Borston, opened a box during a well-attended press conference containing a very important set of Abraham Lincoln artifacts, namely, the contents of his pockets the night he died. The most interesting fact about this set of items is that they were lost for nearly 4 decades here at the Library of Congress, said Doug. Borston became the Librarian of Congress in 1975. One day he walked into the closet inside this office. Doug paused and pointed to a door only steps away from the desk. Inside, he found a package marked for the Librarian of Congress. Borston pulled off a layer of wrapping and discovered the box was marked as the contents of Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated. Librarian Borston was initially skeptical, but it was verified that the items inside the package were indeed authentic. A few months later, the public reveal was held on Lincoln's birthday to share the items with the public. Soon thereafter, they went on display at the Library of Congress, so that visitors could experience the discovery. Doug smiled as he concluded his short speech. How did the items end up at the Library of Congress in the first place? Asked Leah Rutherford. Why not a museum? Doug adjusted his glasses. We can only speculate, but we know that the items belonged to Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, for many years. His daughter, Mary Lincoln Isham, donated the items along with the Lincoln papers to the Library of Congress in 1937. Why was the package misplaced for so long? Asked Representative Chang. That's a mystery, said Doug. Gustav Gaffney interjected. But the good news is that it's no longer lost, and we have come together to recreate Librarian Borston's finest moment as he shared the collection with journalists and scholars. Gordon Endicott spoke. Nonetheless, we don't quite trust the collection to reside inside the closet in an unprotected package to recreate the Borston unveiling. He walked over to the closet and opened the door. We have invested in a state-of-the-art biometric safe for this occasion. We turned our gaze to the inside of the small room. Inside was a gray steel box the size of a mini-fridge. Gaffney joined Endicott. This safe can only be opened using fingerprints. It ensures the contents cannot be stolen due to a safe cracker. It has been fastened to the floor using our strongest enforcements. He attempted to move the safe, which didn't budge an inch. Given Gaffney's slight build, was he really the best person to demonstrate the safe's security? Doug must have read my mind. The safe isn't going anywhere. I watched the architect of the Capitol install multiple bolts earlier today, he said. Apparently, when thefts occur, safes are typically not opened on site. Instead, they are removed from the premises and then cracked after hours of work. Well, if the Library of Congress gig didn't work out over the long term, maybe Doug had a future as a cat burglar. I suppressed a smile as the theme from the Pink Panther ran through my head. Gaffney bent down and placed his finger on the keypad of the safe. Moments later, the door opened. For security purposes, the fingerprints of only 2 people will operate the safe, said Janice Jackson. Gaffney cleared his throat. Myself, as you've just seen. Of course, the other person is the Librarian of Congress. She will open the safe tomorrow during our official reenactment. Gaffney stepped aside as Endicott reached into the...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?